The area known as Mpondoland is the cannabis belt of South Africa. Cultivating and selling cannabis provides a livelihood to many here. Now they believe that the new bill threatens their only means of generating an income.
There's this bill and no one was consulted. So we feel like the government officials, in fact the senior ones, should have come to me as well as my people and told them and unpacked all this so that we know what it entails. So we can't be able to comment on something that we don't know. So we plead the government to please bring the officials so that they can unpack this, so that we can be aware of this, so that we can discuss it.
The cannabis farmer says the bill proposes that the household would only be allowed to have up to 8 plants for a private use.
Intsangu le kudala ikhona emampondweni. Ngoku ibekelwa imiqathango ethile ebonakalisa into ba
We have been using and planting cannabis here in Mpondoland. Now there are restrictions that prohibit us from using and selling it. These restrictions seek to deprive us and enrich the rich.
It's better than the time when the ganja you say is not illegal. Now you say you're gonna say the ganja is legal, but this is not legal. Still close that ganja because there is no way to plant plant. Because in my family, I have 10 members in one house. So I don't think it's a good idea to plant 4 or 12 plants and this family gonna survive about this? No. I'm so worried about this bill put.
Advocacy groups want the bill scrapped or the consultation process extended.
Because the information was never sent by the same government to the people through the right channels, where if you send it to the areas where people are growing, you can't send it on IT systems. You're supposed to send it through the local government and the traditional leaders. People don't know about it, with busy as an NGO going all over talking to people about this, which they don't know. Then the next thing, you'll find that when they've closed and passed the bill and it becomes a law, what will happen, a lot of people will be arrested, far more than it was happening during apartheid.
The cannabis farmers want the bill to open more economic doors for them and not one that would smother their business. The deadline for public comment on the bill has been extended to the end of November.
In our report, Cannabis Goes on Trial, we showed you the state of affairs concerning the South African policy towards Daga. Due to the extensive documentation and the vast amount of experts, the trial is postponed until further notice. But the necessity of the trial remains.
Together, we are taking the fight against drugs to another level.
Together, moving South Africa forward.
Like every year, police helicopters descend on the valleys to spray cannabis fields with poison. This still happens despite widespread criticism claiming that glyphosates in the poison seriously impact flora, fauna, and people.
We saw the aftermath of crop spraying by the South African Police Service out of helicopters. It's very difficult for us to prove the degradation of the environment because they're spraying glyphosates everywhere. But what we can see is the socio-economic downfall, the downside these people have. They have no crops, they have no food, so a lot of them are turning to crime because they're trying to put food on the table.
As shown, Cannabis News Network visited several locations in and around Johannesburg, South Africa's biggest city, to purchase weed. By doing so, we tried to get an idea of the quality.
Get some weed?
Yeah.
Please. Yeah, how much? 30. 30, yeah.
Cannabis News Network has introduced the Canna test, a test which shows what compounds are present in the plant. These are the two samples we bought. Sample A is called cheese. Sample B is known as Swazi.
There we have a seed. If you've got like a bag like this, and let's say you have about 6 or 7 seeds, it makes quite a big difference. Overall, let's say if we look at A, if this were to be clean, it would be quite interesting from a medicinal point of view because you have almost equal amounts of CBD and THC. It's almost slightly bigger in THC than it is CBD, but they're almost equal. The thing that made a problem was when we looked at this one, even from without the microscope, I saw all these white patches, and when I look at under the microscope, they look almost like mold, yeah, like the buildings, the beginning of bacteria building up. And the same thing with B. B is interesting because you have a really high concentration of THCV. I mean, the THC itself is only about 10%, so it's really, once again, quite low grade, but the THCV makes it a little bit interesting. This, you would expect it to give you a nice, clear high. The problem being is when I look at it, once again, it's very low grade, it's got lots of seeds, lots of sticks, and when we look at it under the microscope, we found a lot of areas which are potential contamination on them. It's difficult, once again, to say what it is precisely, but from my point of view, it does look like the beginning of mold. Essentially, places like Swaziland, Malawi and stuff, they have good sun, they have great agricultural bases, so you can grow good weed there. The problem is, because of the illicit markets, what we have is very low-grade products. To just smell it was it made me sick. Just smelling it, I couldn't even touch that.
Your source of cannabis news. Cannabis News Network.
Mpondoland rural growers. Umzimvubu Farmers Support Network. We started our organization back in 2015. By an action that was ongoing for over 18 years, whereby Amapolisa would come to the Eastern Cape and strategically spray a very poisonous chemical, glyphosate, and spray it over amasimi abantu to try and eradicate the growing of cannabis. They would spray this chemical over the fields, over food crops, over people's homesteads, over rivers, contaminating everything. And there is actually a way in which it is supposed to be done if you are going to use the pesticide.
Good afternoon, Acting Interim Chair. I'm Ricky Stone from the Umzimvubu Farmers Support Network.
Welcome. You're the first one to present.
We are indeed, Chair.
Thank you very much. You have 20 minutes for your presentation, and thereafter we'll engage in questions and clarities. So please go ahead.
Honourable Chairperson, honourable members of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services, and members of civil society. I'm a proud South African, and my name is Ricky Stone. I'm a practicing attorney by profession, but today I appear before you in my capacity as a director of the Umzimvubu Farmers Support Network. The main beneficiaries of our organization are the hundreds and thousands of rural subsistence cannabis farmers in the Amapondo region, known culturally and traditionally as the Amapondo Asetrakleni. The Amapondo have farmed cannabis and traded it lawfully for over 300 years. Their specific indigenous cannabis cultivars are well known to contain some of the DNA of the modern day cannabis. Some of the founding objectives of the UFSN were to assist our farmer beneficiaries with a legal challenge against the government's discriminatory drug policy of forced area eradication of the illicit cannabis crops in the region for over 2 decades, using a known cancer-causing herbicide, glyphosate, which was sprayed from SAPS helicopters onto cannabis waterways, farmlands, livestock, homesteads, and people. Secondly, to advocate for legal and economic policies that include historical cannabis-producing communities in the emerging legal cannabis industry. And thirdly, to bridge the gap between our beneficiaries and the government so that their heritage wealth may be activated and their indigenous knowledge on cannabis preserved. Some of our cannabis credentials as an organization: in 2016, we invoked a legal strategy to put an end to the aerial eradication of indigenous cannabis farms in Mpondoland by the SAPS, and this challenge was ultimately successful. In 2017, we submitted detailed comments on the MCC, which is now SAPRA, on their guidelines on the cultivation of cannabis and the manufacture of cannabis-related pharmaceutical products. Later in 2018, we made a submission to the 64th session of the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The purpose of the submission was to highlight the genuine plight of the Amapondo legacy cannabis farmers, the SAPS's aerial eradication program using glyphosate, and to alert the committee to the fact that these legacy farmers are being left behind in the great green gold rush. The outcome of our submission was that the committee stated that they are concerned about the use of glyphosate, which was classified as probably carcinogenic by the International Agency for Research on Cancer of the World Health Organization, in the aerial spraying of cannabis crops to control the illicit cultivation of cannabis in the Mpondoland region. The committee went on to recommend that the state party, South Africa, suspend such aerial spraying and instead offer alternative development programs to the affected communities to encourage them to abandon the illicit cultivation of cannabis, including, and I emphasize that, the possibility of participating in the medical cannabis market through a licensing program for small-scale community farmers.
Molo.
Ebo.
Molo. Hola, mama.
Molo baba.
Last year it didn't rain. Then yaga in a pelile and I am full.
Due to
emotional late and stuff, it's maybe as she was saying.
The low-hanging clouds.
Low-hanging
late.
Does she smoke? We are chai.
Hayi lethu itsangu yodwa cha. Kodwa ngamaxesha athile.
Smoke ganja only on certain times.
And does she use it for any medicinal benefits?
Ewe ndiyalisebenzisa kodwa ndilaze endaweni eyi-1 kanje. Lento le. La.
He only knows on one side the leaves.
Kodwa ezinye indawo andizazi.
And what she do with it? For what?
Wenzani ngamaqhabi?
Amagqabi. Abona mangaba khona umuntu ekhohlela yebo.
Taking it and crush it.
Okay. To make a juice.
To make a juice for anyone who's got a very terrible sore.
That's what they do in California. That's amazing.
Search for COVID.
How many years you been growing?
46 years.
46 years.
Wow.
46 years.
All your life from child.
That's longer than me.
You learn from your fathers.
She learned it from the parents.
Ba ekhayeni ni 6 nonke nabantwana nezutshiya ekhaya phatha amakhuba nonke nabazali benu yabo phatha amakhuba kuyosetyenzwa kwanja kanje.
At home, if you are like a family, like the children are learning from their father and mother, they are forced to. That's how she started.
46 years.
Wow.
You hardly ever meet people that grow longer than us.
You have kids also yourself? No,
Hey, by 5.
5 kids. And they work in the field?
Yeah.
Now they're at school now, you would have seen them. Yeah, working with them at school.
Normally you working alone here or somebody help you?
Papa, there is Papa.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us again. We're sitting here with a man that needs no introduction, Simon. Thanks for joining us again. Like you've done it a few times now, we do appreciate it. You're a true legend in the space, and you really know what's going on. So we were just trying to take advantage of the scenario that we're in now and just get your outlook on things that are going on in South Africa and with yourself. And there's a couple of interesting things going on, like what we watched this morning, the public's response to the private bill. But I think we'll just start off by just getting a quick update from the Transkei, in your opinion, Umzimvubu.
Yes, that's a great place to start. Yeah, how's things going in that community?
Yeah, so it's two very distinct journeys for me, the Wild Coast and what's happening there. And again, it sort of goes back to the coastline and the recreational growers, and in many ways it's quite an amazing thing to study that and to look at that and to look at what the guys are achieving in terms of output and quality. The new techniques that are unheard in the world, where guys are cloning into the ground and cloning into cattle manure and all sorts of it's a whole movie on its own, how the guys have taken processes that we follow, like we use a cloning room and pots, and they don't have access to pots and bags, so they sort of just clone straight into the ground.
Innovate using the environment.
I've seen guys buckets covering plants in the day, then moving them at night, and kind of how they reach plants into the ground. And so there's that, and that is very much a positive picture in some ways, because it's whole villages turning on. They still, even with the price as low as it is, can earn a very, very good kind of income because they are subsisting, because they don't have costs. So 1,000 rand, for a rural family means a lot when they're not paying rent and when they're kind of feeding themselves. And so in many ways, for the Wild Coast, it is the magic crop. And then we've also got to look at what's happening inland, and that's where the farmers are growing Landrace prolifically, and it still is the biggest Landrace production area in sub-Saharan Africa.
Die kragtige vloei van die Umzimvubu rivier het 'n ruwe vallei tussen die heuwels van Mpondoland uitgekalwe. Vir geslagte lank al kweek mense hier 'n unieke cannabis variëteit. Die kragtige medisyne deel van hulle kultuur en geestelike praktyke en hulle belangrikste bron van inkomste.
In terms of pure numbers of fields and numbers of people involved, our organization, the NGO that I co-founded, the UFSN, Umzimvubu Farmers Support Network, has probably, identified almost 20,000 fields in the Umzimvubu area.
We are using very basic techniques of measuring out first a certain square of a certain area, then manually counting all the stalks.
Om die gemiddelde te kry, het Simon elke stingel gemeet en geweeg deur 'n skaal te praktiseer uit 'n bankie, ons roeispaan en 'n emmer water. En die resultaat? Gemiddeld produseer elke huishouding hier 8.4 ton stingels per oes. En die 20 tot 60.000 Mpondoland boere neem potensieel tussen 190 en 570.000 ton koolstof per jaar uit die atmosfeer op.
Wow. And each field has hundreds of plots.
Yeah, and also represents a family.
You showed us some maps the other day as well.
Yeah. So those maps are very much about, defining the landrace area for government. And there is some sort of quite progressive kind of thought that has been happening and work that the organization's been doing towards looking at the landrace as an indigenous hemp.
Yeah.
And that process started quite a long time ago. Pretty much our organization was formed around the spraying in 2014, 2015. And then when that ended, it was ended through Ricky Stone's legal intervention, and our focus became very much about including South Africans and the Mpondoland farmers. Now, the big challenge you have there when you look at the sheer scale and amount of people is like you realize very, very quickly that you're not going to find a market for 60,000 growers in the recreational space. And at the same time, you have this very unique landrace that, although it is prolific, is still kind of quite a unique and special thing.
Navorsing wys dat die cannabis-variëteite hier potensieel baie omgewings- en mediese waarde het. Omdat dit al vir eeue lank hier gekweek word, het hulle aangepas en unieke eienskappe ontwikkel.
We have land races which are unique because of the unique places that they're being grown, but also because of the indigenous knowledge that those people who are growing them bring. That makes Africa and South Africa very interesting from a genetics perspective.
Die variëteite het aangepas om in uiterste omstandighede van swaar reën tot droogtes te floreer, sonder besproeiing of plaagdoders. Navorsing van die Universiteit van die Vrystaat het ook moontlike unieke mediese voordele in hierdie variëteite ontdek.
There are indications and there is some kind of proof that it is beneficial, can be beneficial in cancer, breast cancer treatment. But these studies to confirm that and to solidify those findings are only in a conception stage, I would say.
It's a very strong sativa plant that grows in a very, very dry area in the valley systems, and it's adapted to that. So it's very highly drought resistant and very interesting medicinally as well in terms of its balance of terpenes and its ability to kind of help breast cancer. And so what happened in those areas is that government came in very, very quickly and started preaching hemp and promoting aggressively hemp projects in the area. And while this land race is massive, it's the last thing you'd want to do is to start promoting the idea of hermaphroditic hemp plants, throwing their male pollen. And so that wasn't the solution, but also for the communities, it was a step backwards. They kind of trying to get themselves out of poverty, and unfortunately the land race still retails really for a very, very low price, for around 600 Rand for a 20-litre bucket. So that's one of the lowest prices in the world.
And the movement of hemp directly affected the price of that land race, you're saying now that the hemp movement negatively affected them. I'm just trying to paint the picture on how exactly it did affect it.
Because it's almost like we heard this morning in the talk, is like there shouldn't really be a distinction between hemp and cannabis, because now this isn't necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, but hemp means like below a certain level of THC, right? Or now that means their plants, the indigenous landrace that they're growing there is insufficient because its THC is too high. Or
I don't see a reason why there are so many restrictions.
'n Groot rede is dat die Mpondoland variëteite se tetrahydrocannabinol inhoud dit binne die mediese kategorie laat val. En daarom het jy 'n mediese permit nodig.
The license itself is not that expensive, but then you need an upfront cost. Anything from the numbers I've heard in industry, 15 to 50 million Rand.
When you start talking of millions, it means you're expecting other people to come from other areas and come and take our livelihood.
Maar Mazwelibanzi is vasbeslote.
Ndiyaziyenza. Xa ndiyazibizwa ndinceda apha endlini njengoba ndinabantwana bangaka, sendibondla ngayo.
Mazwelibanzi en Jozololo wil nie deel van 'n onwettige bedryf wees nie en verstaan dat regulasies nodig is om onder meer veiligheid te verseker en misbruik te bekamp. Maar terwyl amptelike prosesse rondom die ontwikkeling van 'n cannabis meesterplan nog aan die gang is, keer huidige regulasies nog enige iemand om selfs die stingels wettiglik van die Mpondoland families te koop.
Yeah, exactly. And so that became the focus of our organization. And I can't really believe that I've actually been doing work with hemp and land race and everything, but it was actually a process of looking for a solution based on preserving the land race. And then when you look at that, you notice that there's very, very little value that people are getting. And there was some very groundbreaking research done by a Dutch student called Simon Strainhunter, and that really provided a very, very accurate picture of some of the villages where we work in and what's going on. And it's a very, very sad picture. It's a picture where, some of the villages, the average last time they'd sold cannabis was 21 months ago, and another village it was 3 years ago. So these are heritage growers that have survived for hundreds of years that don't actually grow other food or do other agriculture. And
the main crop is cannabis.
And that market is just shut off completely. And the reason that market is shut off is that that market formerly served the poorest areas like Khayelitsha and KwaMashu, the big townships. And unfortunately, with this proliferation of cheese and Sunset Sherbet, now that's even cheaper versions of that is now hitting the township, and people's tastes have changed. So suddenly there's no market in the recreational space, but there is massive kind of opportunity if we look at the benefication, the processing. So right now there's 2 villages in Kumbi and Dikidini, and there's 51 families that live there, and I think they have 3.4 tons of cannabis sitting in storage. That translates roughly to about 1.3 million rand if they sell that cannabis now at the price they're getting. But the problem is they're not able to sell it. Not a gram has moved in 3 years. But if they just took that cannabis and processed it into bubble hash, and we took a really conservative amount, say 10 rand a gram, then already that cannabis can move in value 10 million, from 1.3 million to 10 million. And if they did a simple like fika extraction, that could occur to 20 million in value. But that being illegal, we realized and started wondering about the opportunity presented by the biomass.
The products that are to be eked out of hemp and cannabis are in great demand around the world. We want to harness this so that we can unleash the energy of our ordinary farmers, especially in the Eastern Cape, as well as in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly in the Mpondoland area.
Aan die ander kant van die land het ek 'n Bo-Kaapse gastehuis beleef wat van hempkriet gebou is. Dit behoort aan Wolf, 'n Suid-Afrikaanse argitek wat 'n absolute pionier in hempkonstruksie in die land is. Ek het nou vir my 'n smoothie van hemproteïene gemaak voordat ek gestort het en hempseep, hempshampoo, hempskeerseep en hempdeodorant gebruik het en toe vir myself lekker vars hempklere aangetrek. My heel beste is dat ek verlede nag in hierdie hemphuis kon slaap. En ek het baie lekker geslaap. En stil hier binne, die temperatuur is lekker en mens kan amper die mure voel asemhaal. En dis die heel beste, is daai wete dat hierdie materiale is nie gemyn en die omgewing en die proses besoedel nie, maar 80% daarvan is letterlik aangeplant, het koolstof uit die atmosfeer uit opgeneem en suurstof tot die omgewing bygedra. 'n Boumateriaal wat letterlik klimaatsverandering kan help omkeer deur koolstof-negatiewe geboue te skep. 'n Paar blokke van die gastehuis is een van die wêreld se grootste hempkonstruksies besig om vorm aan te neem. En Wolf is die argitek.
It needs to be fully verified, but as far as we know, this is currently the tallest building to utilize this amount of hemp in the world.
Ons is al klaar besig om 'n taamlike paar groot projekte te supply met die hempkrietblokke. So dit is ons grootste behoefte aan roumateriaal. Op die oomblik voer ons roumateriaal nog in van Europa af.
So you can imagine just how much we are paying to get it out here. Yeah. And meantime, we sit with potential growers who could be brought into this global value chain.
By the stalks, by the seeds. And this was also spurred by the work of Nati Ferreira and the work of Simon Strainhunter, who were both kind of like trying to ask this question, is there value in the biomass? And if you ask all the other experts in the world, no one could tell us. No one could tell us two things, whether the small-scale farmer with their hoes and their oxen, whether they can actually compete against the hemp farmer in the Free State with his combine harvester and all his money and his irrigation. That is a question, and that still is very unresolved. We're not sure whether and number two, whether there was actually any value in the landrace, in this landrace hemp, which is growing wild and adapted and grows perfectly without any water, without any insecticides or even feeding, just rocks. So that was always the question, and it really just came down to the fact that no one had gone out and measured. So we went out there firstly with Simon Strainhunter. We measured 1 square meters, and we were able to, and the results came in, and they were mind-blowing. They were so mind-blowing that when I got home and we took the calculator out and we started quantifying it, we almost immediately just booked a trip straight to go back into the area and retest the numbers because they were almost just too good to be true. And how the numbers worked out is that we started to hit around 900 grams per square meter, but this wasn't accurately measured. It was measured using, you didn't have an accurate
900 grams of biomass.
Of biomass per square meter. And then I immediately contacted, because Simon left, and then Nati was up for a trip, and so I contacted Nati and we went in there and we did it again, and then the numbers were even better. We hit an amount of 2 kgs, an average of 2 kgs per square meter, which I must add, Nati's taken this landrace back to his agricultural research crops that he's doing in the Western Cape, and he's also hit 2 kilos of biomass per square meter.
Volgens Simon se berekeninge word daar tussen 334.000 en 1 miljoen ton stingels in die hele Mpondoland per jaar geproduseer. As die kwaliteit reg is, kan dit potensieel tussen 233 en 700 miljoen blokke maak, genoeg om tussen 72.000 en 218.000 klein maar topgehalte hemphuise in 'n plek soos Khayelitsha te bou. Al die koolstof wat hierdie plante uit die atmosfeer gesuig het, kan in mure vasgevang word vir Suid-Afrikaners desperaat vir behuising.
So what that translates to in rands and cents is quite interesting, but we didn't really have a number, and so we were at the last expo approached by Wolf from Afimat, Wolf who's an architect, and a guy called Bossi from Afimat, and they are kind of probably the biggest makers of hemp blocks.
Okay.
And they're building that hotel, and they basically told us that, look, they're paying 8,000 rand a ton to import this herd from Germany. And so they talked about, couldn't they be buying the biomass from Mpondoland, which seems logical, right?
It's right
the
there.
president says, let's do it. The Department of Agriculture saying that's fine. No, it's not fine. It's still illegal.
Mense soos Bossie en Wolf sal dit graag koop as hulle mag. In plaas daarvan word dit in 'n teenproduktiewe siklus verbrand.
We're in a country where we need to find creative ways of alleviating unemployment and all of that.
Jy weet, ons sit met omstandighede daar waar ons weet die plant, dis goeie omstandighede vir die plant om te groei, en weer daar's kennis rondom die plant.
And they need to buy a stock to make a bricks, but they're not allowed to buy from Mpondoland. This is a stupid idea. It's not a brilliant idea from my side.
We could be exporting. At the moment, we're importing hemp and hempcrete, which is a great disservice to the country.
The South African money now is going to outside instead of coming to help the poor people in Mpondoland.
And basically, after lots of excitement, we mapped out how much hemp there was there. It represented millions and millions of rands in value right now. They offered those farmers 3,500 a ton instead of the 8,000 that they're paying now.
They're already paying.
So they're saving and the communities will.
And if we take that 3,500 rand a ton, that translates to 7 rand per square meter, which means that some of those farmers are sitting on between 35 and 70,000 rand of hemp stalks right now that they're just burning.
They're not utilising.
They're not utilising,
Yeah.
And so the craziest thing that came out from that research was actually that the biomass was more valuable than the cannabis.
Yeah.
But why is the cannabis so invaluable? I'm sure it's got its own great properties and cannabinoid profiles.
And it does, and it should be. And so that's something, if we look at both of those, then we've got something truly that can really take 60,000 people out of poverty. And that is to look at the cannabinoids and the terpenes and the biomass together.
Tot 100 jaar gelede een van ons waardevolste en mees gerespekteerde plante. Dink net, as die plant weer daardie gerespekteerde posisie in die samelewing kan inneem. Dink net as slimme regulasies die struikelblokke vir Mpondoland gemeenskappe uit die weg kan ruim. Dink net, in plaas daarvan om klimaatsverandering erger te maak, kan die boubedryf tonne koolstof uit die atmosfeer uit opneem. Dink net, in plaas van groot gate in die grond om klei, sand en grys uit te grawe, kan ons boumateriaal aanplant. Dink net, in plaas van sinkhuisies kan mense in ons land in kwaliteithuise bly. Dink net, in plaas daarvan dat mense soos hierdie soos kriminele behandel word, kan hulle goeie bestaan maak deurdat hulle 'n bydrae lewer tot gesonder blyplekke, 'n gesonder ekonomie en 'n gesonder omgewing.
hayi into endirhalelayo ngoba ndimdala ndirhalela umzi ndiwakhe ube mhle.
And so that's kind of where our NGO has then focused our work for the last 3 years. And it has been kind of the farmers who've kind of been directing that and been saying, look, there's got to be a better solution to hemp. Also, unfortunately, it's not a case of just coming into the landrace areas and replacing it with high-grade plants. If you wear your human rights cap, often I've even been challenged on that one. Why didn't you introduce plants? And for 7 years, we haven't introduced seeds, and we haven't promoted the introduction of seeds because we've really looked at trying to use the landrace. And there's a huge compelling argument for that, and that argument is also economic and logistic. It is around the landrace being perfectly adapted. So in all the areas where government's never going to get, they're never going to be able to help farmers, they're not going to put in irrigation, they're not going to, then that is actually the go-to survival plant. And it will always be that up those valleys. It's a plant that anyone can just sow winter or summer in those valleys and they're going to get a return. So it should be this primary route out of poverty. And then of course you have people growing high-grade plants on the inland, but we want to try and find a use. And so that's where we came with this thing of declare the landrace a hemp. The landrace is an African hemp. Why should we be importing strains from China and Europe, these registered cultivars, which all don't grow shit in South Africa?
When we have this perfect...
We have this plant, and it's growing beautifully. You don't have to do anything. There's 60,000 people growing it now.
Already?
Yeah.
As it is. Like you said, they've got tons of the stuff just sitting there.
So we've already got all the farmers, we've got all the product, everything. We just need to...
And so it's been something we've been pushing, and fortunately, the entire industry, the progressive industry, is picking up on it. Today we had public hearings, and a whole bunch of the hearings were all calling for the same thing, for us to use the landrace, to embrace the landrace, to stop with this Eurocentric approach to hemp, which is this random defined amount. And we've already seen that even though our NGO and the communities that we kind of represent firmly reject the bill, we've also seen that the parliamentarians are moving the goalpost slightly. They've already agreed to move it from 2%, from 1% to 2%, and then there was talk of an exclusion, where the Mpondo farmers would be able to farm, to apply for a hemp license, but then apply to grow the indigenous landrace cultivar with a THC of up to 3.5%.
Okay.
And you were touching just now on that all the stalks and stuff is just sitting there, and the main reason why it's sitting there is it's illegal to transport this stuff. There's no way for it to actually get to the processing facilities.
Well, what we've also got to remember is that the plant has adapted, and it's adapted to this very particular area of this no rain and extreme heat, and so that's why you don't see bud. So first of all, it is a plant that is incredibly terpene rich. If you had to extract it and then look at the percentage of terpenes versus cannabinoids, it's unbelievable. And then number two, because of those rough conditions, it makes an incredibly strong stalk with a very, very shallow root system, that lives off the dew in those valleys. So it is perfectly suited for biomass, and then of course it's also got this incredibly invaluable, very unique terpenes and cannabinoids.
So what's preventing them from utilizing that part of the plant? Is it the knowledge or not having the equipment?
It's right now
the legal environment.
It's the legal environment. It's the law. It's the Drug Trafficking Act.
Around here, it's known as Mpondoland Gold. Cannabis has been a source of income for the people in this area for a long time, feeding families and putting their children through school. But the drive towards commercialization is making rural farmers anxious. If they are left on the periphery, their communities will suffer the most.
It's very interesting that government is showing more interest in cannabis, but I can tell you now, I am no longer going to benefit from what government is proposing. Yes, maybe my grandchildren will. I am an ex-miner. I quit my job and I joined the cannabis business.
I am a cannabis farmer. I was raised up by cannabis income. My parents were poor, and I also decided to follow their footsteps because there's no other way of living. I was trading cannabis in Cape Town. I was once arrested on my way to Cape Town. I served my sentence in Lusikisiki because of cannabis.
President Ramaphosa said in his address, the cannabis plan includes reprioritization of departmental budgets and support for the traditional black farmers. The police will also be aligned with the regulatory reforms. Organized cannabis advocacy groups also demand an inclusive approach.
This is where we were before the 2018 ruling, and this is where we are now. Since then, there has not been much action that we can see. It would be more meaningful if the people who are traditional farmers would be involved in those processes, because they know the industry better than anybody.
There is also a historic connection to cannabis cultivation in the Eastern Cape. For many here, it's the only thing they know.
This is our own hope, our own life. Joblessness and poverty is on the rise. Cost of living is high. I am a proudly cannabis farmer because I got married through the money raised by cannabis. I am looking after 10 school-going children, not mentioning the many great-grandchildren that are also benefiting from the cannabis money. This cannabis is a lifesaver for us here, and we will continue using it as our source of income.
The value and benefits of the plant are well known. It also holds spiritual value for some.
So I think for me, it's very vital and key, economically and health-wise. But now what we need to check as poor people, where are we going to match with government or rich people? Because when you check now, it's free because there were certain highly people who pushed the matter to be free. But that time of us, we were like, go boycott, ganja, cannabis must be free.
We plea even to our chief there in the countryside, no Payana is Lalin, that not to give these people land for their own investment, you know, because what they are investing is for themselves. You see, it doesn't benefit our poor black people, you know.
Small-scale cannabis growers also want relevant government department to start engaging rural communities about the forthcoming changes for the industry. Kululeko Nyembezi, SABC News, Mpondoland.
Okay, he said you must be clean under the tree.
Yeah.
And then you must open the space.
Yes.
So that it can just grow big.
So he pulled a lot of small plants to give space to big ones?
Yes, he pulled a lot of small plants around the plant so that the plant can go.
And how long is he a grower?
97.
97?
Yeah, he was started around
so
97.
24 years. And from who he learned?
And from this one, mother.
From mother?
Yes.
Okay.
How did they figure out that they had to space out the plant and leave a little bit of
If
mess?
you figure out alone or
would
somebody say do like this?
Yeah, it's his parents, he was teaching them to open the
it.
space.
And he have children?
Ungabona abantwana?
He gonna teach his children to do this as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that is nice.
Why don't you grow food? We haven't seen food along the river.
He didn't recognize but the veggies he can grow around this soil.
The soil is too much problematic.
I have another question.
Yeah.
What do they feel about other people? I've heard that the government's giving licenses to people and that some people are getting, rich people are getting licenses. How does it make them feel?
Yeah, he said he think maybe if there's those big guys, they getting a license, maybe can get a job from them.
This guy, he has a question for you.
Bengicela ukubuza uba thina sibamnyama ngeke sikwazi ukufuna incwadi.
Can black people get a license? Is his question. It's not about who you are, it's about money. You need 5 million rand to afford all the things for a license right now, and that's what everyone is very upset about. I know Oscar and Ariane and everyone say it's crazy, you know, that you can only get a license for 5 million. There's no ways that any company should be able to commercialize this, you know, for profit. Such a beautiful asset for the Mpondo people. It's their cultural heritage, it's their resource, and I think that for all of us it's just this amazing realization that what we're doing here is not about like collecting or grabbing for the sake of profit. What this is really about is celebrating the medicinal benefit, and I think Ariane is quite serious about trying to ensure that we can also find some sort of legal way that people can really own the strain.
So you see this everywhere in these really rural places around the world, you know, and especially here also in South Africa, where the new licenses are coming. We're very scared that these people are going to be pushed back, you know, because legalization comes and then big factories are coming. We always wanted to legalize cannabis, but one of the disadvantages of legalizing cannabis is that a very poor part of the world is going to suffer for a while, unless we find a way for them to be part of this evolution. But you see what governments do, they only grant license to a few big companies in some countries. The only thing we can do is address their issue, which we did in Colombia, which we did in St. Vincent, which we did in Morocco. All those countries, after we came there, legalized or regulated medical marijuana. So the most important thing is that we bring their story alive and show the world what is happening, you know, and then governments and NGOs can pick it up and see what are we going to do to help here and solve this problem.